What is up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with another great college football video for you. We are trying to go around the country. We've talked to a lot of great schools so far. Hope to talk to a lot more. But today we have my personal favorite. This is my team. We got the Florida State Seminoles. I'm here, Sam Fortney as always, joined by my special guest, Zach. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Zach Blostein. I work over at Knowles247.com, covering mainly Florida State recruiting, but I help out, covering the football program as well. So, yeah, man, excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on again. Best part about this show, in my opinion, is that all the guys who host this, we're all fans of different spots in Florida. I'm a Seminoles guy. I've been for years now. It's my team. My friend Michael, who hosts this with me, he's Gators, and our other friend Ryan is a Hurricanes guy. So we're a bit all over the place, which I think is almost the best part. But without further ado, I want to get straight into this episode because we've got a lot to talk about. Florida State is one of the most interesting teams in the country, in my opinion, going into next season. Had a pretty good offseason in my eyes, definitely a good offseason in the portal. And that's kind of where we're going to start. We're going to start with an offseason recap. So I want to hit the recruiting trail first before I hit what happened in the portal. We start out as a top 5 class. We've got 3 5-stars. Everything is kind of looking good. Signing day comes, rankings change, stuff flips. Armando Blount flips to Miami, and KJ Bolden, worst of all, flips to Georgia. That makes 3 5-stars that have been flipped in the Mike Norvell era, if you want to count Travis Hunter. It might even be more, when rankings shift, but that's for sure at least 3 big name 5-stars that have flipped. Has that been a problem? Like, what has been kind of the issue as far as retaining 5-star talent for Mike Norvell? Do you think that has been an issue, or am I just kind of overblowing a problem?
Yeah. Sorry, it's cutting out a little bit, but yeah. So I think you asked, if whether it's an issue.
Yeah,
With Mike
retaining
Norvell
5-star talent.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it speaks to, some issues going on with, their overall recruiting operation. I think that, they do, show a great effort in developing relationships with recruits. But there's all sorts of factors now when it comes to these recruits making decisions. And, as we both know, like closer to signing day, things get very heated. These prospects are having to make these, crucial decisions for their future. And with NIL now in the mix, that only complicates things. And, I definitely do think that's a factor now. And that's probably part of the reason why you see, some of these recruits and specifically recruits in Florida State's classes, making these decisions to flip late. But I think some of this stuff is preventable. But yeah, I mean, if we want to talk specific recruits like the KJ Bolden recruitment, Florida State was hearing great things until the end. So maybe it's an issue of their staff not getting solid communication from the camp of the recruit. There's a multitude of things you can look at as possible issues as to why that keeps occurring. But hopefully moving forward, Florida State kind of figures out whatever's going on there and is able to hold on to some of these elite players in their class.
Yeah, I mean, even with these 2 guys getting flipped, they do bring in still a pretty impressive class. It's ranked 12th according to 24/7. It's just filled with a ton of 4 stars. And that's kind of my next question for you. When we look at instant impact recruits, right? Because there are some holes on this team even after the portal window is kind of closed. I look at a bit of an uncertainty at wide receiver, the defensive line depth, stuff like that. Who do you see as instant impact recruits? Because in my opinion, I see a guy like Cam Davis, I think can be another power back. Potentially, he can wiggle his way around that running back room. And then he's really my biggest one. Everyone else I feel like is kind of hidden in the depth chart for now. Maybe some guys in the DB room like Howard or Kai Bates can come in and make impact. But for me, it's Cam Davis. Who do you see as an instant impact recruit in this year's class?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think Cam Davis is the most obvious choice. I think he's going to get snaps at running back for Florida State in 2024. I think, from what I've heard early on in offseason conditioning, since he was an early enrollee, he's looked awesome and looks, ready to contribute. So definitely agree with you on that. I guess the other one I would note is probably Landon Thomas, the tight end.
The tight end.
4-star tight end out of South Georgia. He's a guy that I think Florida State wants to see kind of how much he can contribute during the spring. Like, does he elevate his game enough to where you can kind of count on him to get a quality amount of snaps in year one. Because I think if not, there might be, room for Florida State to maybe add a more experienced, guy that's actually
Right.
played, a good amount of football in that room. Because if you look at the tight end room, it's,
It's a
a lot
bit
of guys
thin
that,
after Jaheim Bell leaves.
yeah, exactly. So like you have Kyle Morlock who played a lot of football for Florida State this past season, but he wasn't really a starter. And then the guys behind him have either been injured or they're young. So just a lot of inexperience. So yeah, I definitely do think that Landon Thomas has an opportunity to contribute early. I think that's really, contingent on what he does this spring for Florida State.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that more later, just kind of the holes around this team. But in my opinion, that's the biggest one, right? It's just the receiving room all across the board, whether it's receiver, whether it's tight end. A lot of guys leave for the draft. And just the replacements are a lot of unproven guys, not as, they're not as proven as last year when we had a guy like Keon Coleman come in who was experienced. He fits in with Johnny Wilson, who already had experience, Jaheim Bell, experience. So there's not a lot of that on the roster right now. But the recruiting class is definitely a big one. There's a lot of depth there. Then you look at the portal class, and that one's ranked 4th according to On3. There's a lot of interesting guys that came in that I like. Malik Benson, I think, has the potential to break out. Obviously, we get our quarterback, TJU, from the portal, and a lot of defensive players. As far as the portal class goes, who do you think is an intriguing transfer there who could potentially break out next year?
Yeah. I think Roydell Williams at running back is going to be a guy for FSU in 2024. Apparently, he's been a really good leader early on, which is, a good sign for a guy that just entered the program in January. That's what you want to hear. The guy kind of leading, early on in his career. And he's a talented player that, kind of was stacked up on Alabama's running back depth chart over the past few seasons, but has always been decently productive. And I think, he could kind of emerge into a running back one role for FSU. And then, obviously, I think the most intriguing transfer is probably DJU.
Yeah.
FSU season kind of rides on,
It
how
literally, it all
effective.
rides
Yeah.
on what he does
It,
at that quarterback
yeah.
position.
It rides on how effective he can be. How does this offense change is probably, one of the most important questions going into this season is, obviously it's been Jordan Travis at the helm for the past few years with DJU now in the mix, completely different body type, completely different quarterback. How does Mike Norvell kind of shift things to, tailor to DJU's game? I think that's going to be really important to know. And then on defense, the entire D line
Yeah.
haul is going to be intriguing how that plays out. They got a bunch of,
We had to replace the whole D line because Pat
yeah,
Payton is the only one left.
exactly. So they bring in a bunch of ends, one D tackle, and I think a lot of those guys are going to be quality. I think that the one that's making the most buzz early is probably Tim Roje out of
From
West
West
Virginia.
Virginia? Yeah.
Yeah, originally from Kentucky, and I think he's a guy that, from what we hear early on, has been had a professional mindset going into these tour duty workouts, and I think he could really shine this spring and kind of burst onto the scene and be a real dude for FSU at the edge position in 2024.
Yeah, we have a lot of edge. That seemed to be a position that they addressed pretty quickly, whether it's Sion Lolohea,
Yeah,
Marvin Jones Jr., this kid from West Virginia. As far as D tackle that goes, though, that still feels like there's a bit of a hole there. I don't feel like the production that we lose with Fisk and Lovett and those guys, I don't really feel like it's been completely replaced. What do they plan to do about, addressing the need there? Are they going to try and shift an edge over into the middle, maybe a spring transfer kind of guy? Do you know what plans they have right now to address that position need?
yeah, I definitely do think that they're going to try to add a guy in the spring at D tackle. It all depends. They're over their scholarship count right now,
Right.
which doesn't really matter until you get to the season, because you can be over in the spring, but whenever the first game hits or whenever fall camp hits, I think you have to have that kind of figured out. But yeah, if they get under that number and they're able to add another player, I think one of the top priorities is going to be D tackle. And yeah, you mentioned like maybe sliding someone inside at the edge
Yeah.
position. I think a guy you mentioned, Sione Lolohea, might be the dude to do that with. But a number of those guys have that kind of versatility to where there are possibilities to kind of play both positions. And I think a kind of surprising slash like unexpected loss for FSU in the December portal window was Dennis Briggs. Not a guy that was, a super heralded name when he was in Tallahassee, but a veteran player who, at his best, was, a guy that can really make a difference in a game. And his issue was just availability. He was always injured, but that could be, a sneaky big loss for FSU, especially if they're not able to go and add a D tackle in the spring window, the
Yeah.
spring portal window. So, yeah, I'm interested to see what they do at that position. I think the starters are pretty much there, and Daryl Jackson and Josh Farmer, but behind them, you lose Malcolm Ray as well to the transfer portal, who, he's not a guy that is a huge difference maker, but he's played a ton of football for Florida State over the past few
Yeah.
seasons. So, yeah, and he was a solid pass rushing defensive tackle. So, yeah, I'm really, like you said, like I'm interested to see kind of how that room shakes out behind the two expected starters.
Yeah, safety was another position where there's a bit of an intrigue. Obviously we wanted KJ Bolden. He
Yeah,
ends up flipping. They don't really address it fully in the portal. They kind of get guys who are like two-way. They played the corner and the safety, like Devontae Brown from Miami and UCF. Is that a position of need, or do they feel like they have their guy one way or another?
yeah. I mean, I think they feel pretty confident that because they know that Shaheem Brown is going to be one of the
Yeah,
starters, and they feel confident that they're going to be able to find the other starter on the roster. I think, Devontae Brown, I don't think he's a special player, but
no,
he's a guy that, maybe in a new role, because he hasn't really played safety before at the college level, at least. Maybe in a new role, he can elevate his game, but he had a pretty bad season at Miami this past year at corner,
yeah,
and obviously transferred out. So he provides, at the very least, a veteran option in that room. I don't think FSU is expecting him to go in and be lights out, but there's other guys that need to step up, and I think it starts with Conrad Hussey, the true sophomore. He's got all the talent in the world. The issue with him is just sometimes he's out of place, and
right,
if we've learned anything about FSU's defensive coordinator Adam Fuller, like he needs to trust you to put you on the field. And if Conrad Hussey's blowing assignments, then it's not likely that he's going to see the field. So that's an area of his game that he needs to clean up. To be fair, he was a true freshman this past season.
yeah,
He
yeah,
has to, you know, step in there and make plays. But if he is to be trusted to be one of the starters at safety, I think that's going to be a huge point of emphasis for him, this offseason to try and see if he's kind of elevated his game in that specific facet.
yeah. And they brought in, whether it's through the portal or the recruiting class, a ton of new DBs. So I'm sure worst case scenario they'll find a way to slide
Yeah.
somebody up to that safety spot. That's as far as the defense goes. And on the offense, I think receiver room is really the big question. You bring in guys like Malik Benson, a young kid from LSU, Jalen Brown, trying to fill these holes created by guys like Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson leaving. Between the transfers that we brought in, any new recruits, and then guys from last year like Hakeem Williams, the 5-star that they brought in. Who are they looking at to really step into that wide receiver one role this year to kind of replace the lost production?
Yeah, I think it's Malik Benson, the Alabama transfer. He's the most veteran of the guys they brought in. He's entering his final season of eligibility. Didn't do a ton at Alabama this past season. I think under 200 yards receiving,
Yeah,
but they're banking on him kind of returning to the form he had when he was in JUCO the year
he
prior. He
was the
put up,
number one JUCO
yeah,
prospect when for whatever that's worth.
yeah,
He was ranked pretty high.
exactly. So number one JUCO receiver, number one JUCO prospect in that class before joining Alabama's roster, and he had put up 1,000+ yards that season at his junior college. So if he's able to kind of be that dude for FSU, that's obviously what they prefer, because, like you said, there are a lot of unknowns in that room specifically, and even amongst the guys they brought in, because we've seen in the past, like last season, they bring in Keon Coleman. There's not a lot of unknowns there. Like
Yeah,
he's going to be a dude. Malik Benson is definitely different than that. You're banking on elite speed. Apparently, he's been testing really well in FSU's offseason conditioning stuff. You know, when it comes to just straight speed, and I
Right.
think FSU thinks that he can emerge into wide receiver one. But it can't just be him. It has to be other guys that step up. You mentioned a guy like Hakeem Williams. You know,
Yeah,
he's
I'm
coming off.
personally pretty invested in his
Yeah,
development.
agreed. I think he's a guy that needs to hit for Florida State. He's a 5-star prospect. You know, I think it was the first high school 5-star that Mike Norvell signed. Like
Yeah.
he's a guy that FSU invested a ton of time and resources into, and he's coming off an injury. But I think he'll be full go from what I hear this spring. It's going to be crucial that he continues his development because we saw, you know, from the moment he stepped on campus, it was an uphill battle. He was a little out of shape. He fixed that completely. Like in the middle of the season, I think the Syracuse game is kind of where he was in full form.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, he obviously has that great touchdown in that game, gets injured, you know, right after that contest, and afterwards doesn't really play that much. He played a little bit in the Orange Bowl, but you know, not much after that, or not much besides that. So yeah, he's gonna have to step up. Jalen Brown, you know, he's a deep ball specialist. I would say covered him
Hmm.
actually out of high school when he was down here in Miami at Gulliver Prep. But yeah, he's a talented prospect. I'm interested to see kind of where his game is at because I haven't, you know, he's been at LSU the past year. I mean, he's was in one of the best receiver rooms in the
Receiver.
country.
Yeah.
Yeah, so interested to see kind of where his game is at now that he's, you know, officially in Tallahassee. And then there are a number of other guys that have been on the roster: Kentron Portier, Darian Williamson, all
I
guys that have
think
never
Douglas is
been.
still there too, right?
Yeah, Ja'Kai Douglas in the slot,
Yeah.
he's going to be big. Destin Hill in the slot.
Yeah. There you
There's
go.
there's a number of guys that could emerge, but like we've said, like it's a lot of unproven talent. So it's time for these guys to kind of step up and prove that they're you know, able to emerge into, you know, start, you know, FSU starting receiver core.
Yeah, I think that'll definitely be one of the more intriguing storylines in the spring. Real quick before we move on, one last question. Briefly, do you think Luke Kromenhoek? He's a highly touted recruit at quarterback that we bring in to hopefully be the future. Do you think he's going to be QB2 right away behind DJU, or is he expected to maybe redshirt and Brock Glenn will be the backup?
Yeah, I'm probably expecting him to redshirt. I think that, you know, barring any injuries or anything like that, like I think the staff really, really likes Brock Glenn. They think
Hmm.
that he can be a guy for them. And you know, I do think they're gonna, at least on paper, you know, make it a quarterback competition this year. But I do expect DJU to win out. But yeah, for Luke, I he's a really talented prospect, and he's
It's
a
only
guy that
been 2 years of football, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
exactly. So he's newer to the quarterback position, not a guy that's, you know, like he's been training at quarterback for a while, but
Right.
like you said, his first 2 years of his high school career, he was playing behind a guy that went to Auburn at the quarterback position at his high school and was playing safety and not, you know, emerged as a, you know, true top tier quarterback talent in his junior season, continued that on in his senior year. And I think he just needs a year or two of development, and he's going to be a
Yeah.
dude at the college level. But yeah, I mean, he's got to bulk up some. He's a little bit on the skinnier side, and but I think the world of him. I mean, we had him on a podcast on our YouTube channel, and dude, he was. We were playing like clips of his junior season after his junior season. He was going back, remembering where each play, you know, was positioned in each game. Like, oh, he would be able to name
Man.
like, you know, what drive of the game that was. That, you know, it was not on the screen. It was just his huddle tape. So super impressive kid, and I, you know, I think the world of him, and yeah, definitely not going to doubt him. I don't doubt that he could challenge Brock Glenn for the quarterback 2 spot. But I do think that FSU thinks highly of Glenn, and they're probably going to roll with him as you know, quarterback 2, at least for the beginning of 2024.
Do you personally, um, who of between those two would you personally roll with as the guy that you think has the brighter future going forward?
Yeah. You wait, what'd you say? Sorry,
Oh,
cut out.
sorry. I was saying, between the two of them, who do you personally think has the brighter future going forward?
I think Luke probably, just because his physical traits to me stand out. You know, Brock Glenn, I think he's 6'1", 6'2", and he has a nice arm. But Luke Krummenhoek is, all of 6'4",
Right.
and, can put more weight on his frame. I think his arm is better. He's got a better deep ball, and he has a little bit more athleticism than Brock Glenn. So, yeah, I think I would bank on Krummenhoek being the better prospect long term. But we've seen Norvell run extremely efficient offenses with quarterbacks like Brock Glenn, to where they're, more of a game manager type. I think Brady White at Memphis is a good example of that. He's a guy that, didn't have elite measurables, wasn't, an elite talent, but, that those Memphis offenses were, pretty elite, nationally. So, produced a ton of playmakers. So yeah, I mean, I think they could roll with either and be fine. But if I'm banking, long term, I would go with Drummond.
Yeah, I'm personally pretty invested in him. Obviously, a highly touted recruit, and we hope to one day, get a quarterback. Not to say that Travis wasn't developed by Norvell, but one that was developed in the system from high school to be the starter of the future. So it's gonna be cool to see his development as the year goes. I kind of want to shift to more of the pressing news storyline right now, and that is the ACC or potential ACC and exit slash realignment kind of that FSU is going through. It's a big legal mess. It's a lot of money if they want to leave. It's all just uncertainty tossed in the air. From what you're hearing, what are the actual possibilities? Like, what is the level of realness in this FSU potential exit? Is this a real possibility coming up anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a real possibility. And I think the ongoing legal battle kind of speaks to that. If FSU is able to convince a judge that the you know that the ACC violated all of what they're arguing, then they're going to be able to get out of the breach of or the grant of rights. And if they're able to do that, then they're going to be able to financially afford moving conferences. That's the big if. And if not, I don't think FSU's ponying up however much money it costs to
I think it was $572 million total to
exactly.
leave without a legal victory. If they just
Yeah,
paid it straight up, it would be 572.
yeah, exactly. So no way FSU's ponying up that kind of money to leave. I think to me, I think the more realistic option that I would expect to happen is probably the ACC settling with FSU for some sort of less money than what is on paper right now, the 572 million, like you said. Like I think that's probably the scenario that's most likely, at least to me. I don't know, I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know exactly all of what's going on. I think today they set a court date for April, so that'll be interesting to track kind of how those specific court dates go. But yeah, I mean, I think in the long term, it's very likely that Florida State leaves the conference. I mean, they've set forth a path of they're either they're leaving one way or another, and I think it'll probably end up being them going to the Big Ten. I think that makes more sense than the SEC for a future conference.
Wow.
I don't see the SEC going in and grabbing another Florida school,
Yeah.
whereas the Big Ten doesn't have any real estate down in the state of Florida, and I think that would be a market they'd like to explore. I'm more interested to see kind of what other schools in the ACC, if Florida State is victorious in this lawsuit. I'm interested to see kind of what other programs kind of try to ride the coattails of Florida State if they do indeed win.
Yeah, me personally, I'm just not a fan at all of all this realignment stuff. I like it more when, the landscape of college football is much more spread out, it's much more balanced.
For
I hate
sure.
just stacking up the Big Ten and the SEC, but it unfortunately seems like the reality. One thing I've always talked about, with other people is why can't we just bolster the ACC more? Why, when we go out to add new teams and the Big Ten is adding USC, Washington, UCLA, all these programs, and the SEC is adding Texas and Oklahoma, why is the ACC getting left over with SMU, Cal, and Stanford? Why couldn't we, even in the Pac-12 alone, why couldn't we get a team like Oregon State who had DJU, who had a really good defense, quality coach before he left to go to Michigan State? Why couldn't we get a Washington State who was ranked for a lot of this year with Cam Or why are we getting all these bottom feeders to just weaken our argument as being a capable conference? Why can't we get Notre Dame to come join us full time and make? I feel like that would fix everything. Just put a team like Notre Dame in the ACC, and maybe one good group of five school, bring like a Tulane or something in. I feel like just make moves like that, strengthen up the ACC instead of just tearing down every conference that isn't the SEC or the Big Ten. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or anything, any personal opinions there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I wish that college football wasn't heading this direction, and that is, the two super conferences are getting made. It's going to take a little bit of time, but that's where it's
Yeah.
headed. It's kind of crash course until you get there, and to me, like I'm against it. Like I agree with you. I like when college football has more parity, in that there are great teams in a bunch of different conferences, and there's a lot of competition within those conferences. Like that's the best model. That's what we all grew up with, and I think we all love that. But it seems like you can't really. It's inevitable now to where this is kind of where college football is headed. And yeah, I mean, to touch on what you said about the ACC adding teams, I think it's just the ACC is not a conference that has a lot of value right now, mainly because of these TV deals that they
Yeah.
signed into however many years ago that were super detrimental to the teams actually in the conferences. So like, I mean, they put out the figures like Florida State's losing $30 million every year to compared to the worst team in the SEC or Big Ten,
Right.
just because of a TV deal. Like that's unsustainable for Florida State, who's trying to keep up in the arms race of college football. Amongst the elite, these elite teams are at a basic advantage, preliminary advantage. Florida State can only win so many games in a row. They could have so many great seasons in a row. It's still not going to amount to the built-in money advantage that these teams in the SEC and Big Ten are getting. And I think that's why the ACC isn't able to attract some of these schools that you mentioned. And I don't know like the specifics as to why they couldn't get like an Oregon State.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a better program than, I don't know, Cal.
I think it's the
And
only program that I didn't mind getting added is SMU because there's potential there. There's a good coach. There's quality players.
yeah,
Whatever. But Cal and Stanford, if you're picking from the Pac-12, there's just so many better options that they could have
yeah,
gone and got.
yeah. And, Stanford has been all right in the past. And
Right.
I think, with SMU, I think you're kind of banking on the future there. The ACC is a lost cause to me. Like I think, Florida State obviously wins this lawsuit. I think the conference is going to be in disarray,
Yeah.
because other teams are going to get out. And, it doesn't really matter who they add. And I think, probably some people on the internal of the ACC kind of realize that. But yeah, I mean, I think the reason why they added those teams in the first place, regardless of who they were, was to get to a certain amount of teams, in order
Right. It was
to,
just to hit a specific number to
yes,
where the whole deal wouldn't fall apart. And
exactly.
yeah, so it feels not lazy because maybe you're right. Maybe there is actual implications as to why they couldn't go and get an Oregon State, a Washington State, etc. But I don't know. It's just from a fan's perspective, not knowing the whole details. It is. It's just a little bit frustrating, but it'll be an interesting storyline to follow. I want FSU to stay put. Realistically, like you're saying, it's not probably going to happen. So if they have to move, I'd probably take the Big Ten. I think even with all the additions, the programs they added outside of Oregon aren't exactly at their peak football wise right now. USC struggling, UCLA struggling.
Yeah,
Washington, has a good year, but then loses their coach, loses all their good players. So I feel like, there's still potential to win big in the Big Ten. We can compete with an Ohio State, an Oregon, a Michigan. So, they'd be one of the 3-4 teams vying every year. I don't want to go to the SEC. I don't want to get involved in that. You're right. They have
yeah,
a Florida team. Why would they need another? But anyways, while they're still in the ACC, I do still want to look at this next season because we've got a lot of new stuff, a 12-team playoff, a whole new roster. It's an exciting time. And for those of you watching, I will pull up FSU's schedule so we can kind of take a look at it. I just want to know, like, I'm sure you've looked at the schedule by now. When you look at it, what is kind of your first reaction? What is I just want to know a prediction, a floor, and a ceiling.
yeah. I had them winning 10 games,
Yeah.
when I first looked at it. I think, my prediction always changes because these rosters change so much every portal window. So definitely we'll keep looking at what these other teams are doing in the portal. But yeah, I mean, I think they lose. They probably lose that game against Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's the one that I
That's
marked
just
up as a
that's
loss,
the
even
one
though
loss that
by this
I
time in
think
the
is
year,
the
Notre
most
Dame
likely,
has
on the road,
historically started to
in
choke.
that
So I'm
type
not
of
going to say like
environment,
for
and I
sure,
expect
but
Notre Dame.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree with you on that. But yeah, to me, Notre Dame seems like they're going to be pretty good this year.
yeah,
And
agreed.
they obviously bring in Riley Leonard at quarterback. Like I
Who I've
think,
been a huge proponent of. The people on the channel know I've been calling it since his what was it, early in his sophomore year. So this kid's going to be good. He
yeah,
blows up that year and
nice.
he plays pretty good before injury. But yeah, that's going to be a hard game.
Yeah, definitely. And you got at Miami, and
Right.
you could say whatever about Miami, but Cristobal's been recruiting pretty well the past few cycles, and they just got Cam Ward, so I think
Right.
they're going to be a force. And those are probably the most two likely losses in my book. And who knows, how the rest of the ACC shakes out? Like, is that good enough to go to the ACC championship? This
Right.
past year it would have been, I think. But
Yeah,
obviously,
because Louisville was a 2-loss team also, if I'm
yeah,
not wrong.
yeah, I think you're right, or one loss.
It was one loss in the conference, two overall, but yeah,
Gotcha.
it's
Yeah,
right. It was
yeah,
close.
they
I
lost.
think they would have been the second team because behind them it was North Carolina who was two losses.
Okay, yeah, they lost to Kentucky, I think, the week before playing FSU.
Right.
So yeah, I think the floor is probably 8 wins. Like there are a number. It's tough because there
Yeah.
are a lot of uncertainties with Florida State's
SMU, Clemson
roster.
are both games that could go sideways.
Yeah, I think SMU is a sneaky one. I think Clemson will always be tough. Despite Dabo refusing to use the portal, they recruit elite high school talent.
Yeah.
Um, they did lose, some key pieces, and I'm interested to see kind of how the offense looks in year two with Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik. But
With no weapons still. I mean, they lose their best receiver, if I'm not wrong, Antonio Williams. I think he's gone. And right, like you said, they don't hit the portal, so how
yeah,
they can kind of fill that need too. Clemson's an intriguing one to me, but yeah, it's gonna be a hard game.
did they lose Will Shipley too?
Yeah, Shipley's in the draft, so you're losing, but they have
Okay,
a Mufa, or I know I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but the other running back who was pretty highly touted, so they're not even bothered by Shipley. It's just the receiving weapons that they continue to lose, and in this Cade Klubnik / DJU era, they really haven't been able to put the receiving weapons around those two quarterbacks like they've had in the past.
yeah, 100%. I agree with that. So I'm interested to see kind of how they look. But I think there'll always be a test, and
Yeah,
um, yeah, I think the ceiling is probably I like if everything falls into place, they can win every game on their schedule.
right.
So not like in years past, like I think when you're looking at some Florida State teams, and in the early Norvell era, it was pretty easy to kind of write off a few games as automatic losses. After this past season and kind of what they've proven to be in the portal, I don't think you can really do that anymore. At least with what's on the schedule. So yeah, I mean, I would say the ceiling's probably an undefeated regular season.
Yeah, they've got it's a tricky schedule because you have games where it's like at Duke, where it's like with Malik Murphy, Manny Diaz is the new coach. You don't really know what's to come of there. There's a couple other games where you look and it's like, maybe, Florida, always a rivalry game, even though we've won. It's the last few years it's been close. North Carolina, this is probably the worst quarterback they've had in a while, but it's still a respected program for the most part. But for me personally, when I wrote it down, I said that my prediction was 11-1. I think we can handle all the games except for Notre Dame. Would I be surprised if they go to the 2 losses and maybe drop one to Clemson? I really hope they don't drop the Miami game. I want to go 2-0 in the state of Florida. If they drop the Clemson game, it hurts because it's at home and it's a DJU revenge game. So I don't know. But my prediction is 11-1. My floor I think is 9-3. I don't think between SMU and Miami, I really don't think we would lose both. I think it would be Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame, win all the others, or interchange the two. And then my ceiling is, like you said, 12-0 because I think it is possible we win every game. We've done well in the ACC the last 2 years. Notre Dame by this time in the year is kind of falling apart. We've seen historically, still not completely sold on Freeman and guys like Riley Leonard and their transfers making up the weapons on that offense. But it's going to be intriguing. So, that's as far as the schedule goes. Then the other part of 2024 and going forward is the recruiting class, right? We've got the 2025 recruiting class coming up. It's been a pretty solid class so far. It was ranked pretty high, but as some guys have committed recently, they've dropped down a bit. But they do have a 5-star, which is a big deal like we talked about earlier. Solomon Thomas, the 5-star offensive tackle. They've got a couple other 4-star commits. I've seen a lot of crystal balls lately, but what's kind of the latest news on the 2025 recruiting front?
Yeah, it's been kind of like at a pause just because the recruiting calendar, basically February is a complete dead period, which means prospects can't visit campuses, college campuses. Things are about to kick up though. They're going to have visitors again this coming weekend, and it's going to be like that for the next 2 months, basically until the end of all these spring games in April. And then, we'll move into the official visit season, which is in June. And that's become the new, a lot of guys are making decisions after those official visits. They're even proposing now, the NCAA is proposing a possible summer signing day, which I think if that gets passed, that's going to be insane.
That would be nuts.
Yeah, I don't think people understand the ramifications of that. I think, to name a few things, first of all, senior evaluations of high school prospects is really important to be able to tell how good they're going to be at the next level.
Yeah.
And that's going to go away for a lot of these guys that sign with schools in that, in the month of June or wherever they put it. I think it's going to be at the end of June. Yeah, man, I mean, that's going to be wild if they do indeed put that in place. Some of these schools are going to convince kids to sign. The caveat obviously being that these guys can just transfer out if they don't, if the school they sign with goes 4-8 or whatever during the regular season. So there is that caveat, but I definitely do think it's going to create more problems. But there's so many issues with the current calendar and recruiting. Not to go too deep on it. But yeah, when it comes to FSU's 2025 class, I mean, they're, like you said, they're off to a good start. The guys they landed, I've thrown in a few crystal balls for some pretty talented prospects. I think, they lead for a couple of these guys, and I think, we'll see, how they kind of close on a lot of these visitors that are going to make it to campus this month, and then just over the next, couple months as we, head into the OB season, and that'll be a big, because FSU had most of their class done in, July or August, whenever a lot of those guys, last season. So I think it'll be similar this year, if not even more accelerated, because that's just how kind of recruiting goes. It always accelerates. So yeah, I'm interested to see kind of how this month goes. It's going to be very important for Florida State to get all their top targets on campus. I guess from an early look at it, I don't think they're going to land many elite 5-star.
That's kind of what I was going to ask next. We have Thomas. I was going to ask, did you think that there's maybe any other, not 5, but even just high level 4-star, preferably 5 though, any other potential big time recruits that could join this class?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of it depends on what you define as a big time recruit. So if it's a complete, just 5-star prospect, they have a shot to land a few. I think the most noteworthy one to me is a guy that's actually committed to another school, and that's Elias Williams. He's a tight end out of Camden County, Georgia, committed to Georgia. If you remember last cycle, FSU flipped a 5-star tight end at the time. He obviously dropped in the rankings, but Landon Thomas was committed to Georgia. FSU flipped him from Georgia, signed him. They're trying to do the same with Elias Williams in 2025. He's an elite prospect. He's going to be a 5-star in my opinion. He's ranked in the range to be a 5-star, and he's a guy that I fully expect to continue to be ranked super high. He's the number 1 tight end in the country, 6'7", 235 pounds. He's a guy that FSU has a shot to land. And then you mentioned Solomon Thomas. If he finishes with his current ranking that he has right now, he'll be a 5-star prospect.
Yeah, I think another platform's already put him at 5. It's just they take time with each class, each year.
There are a few other guys that could, rise into the 5-star ranking. Jamie French is a receiver target for them. that they really like. He was a former Alabama commit, decommitted after Nick Saban's retirement, and
Right, that was
it's
a
kind of
good get.
Ohio State and FSU battling. Yeah. And then they have a few other guys. I put in a crystal ball for Daryl Johnson. He's a safety out of Dodge County, Georgia. He is being recruited by, the elite programs, and he's a guy that I think is trending towards Florida State. Tavion Wallace, just outside of top 32 range, which is where all the 5-stars are located.
Yeah,
And he's a linebacker out of Wayne County, Georgia. I put
that'll
in
be
a
a big
crystal
one
ball.
because we're gonna need some linebacker depth.
Exactly. And they need to start landing some elite linebacker talent,
Yeah.
and he would be just that. So yeah, they're off to a good start. They can land some high level talent. And yeah, I'm interested to see kind of how the next months go, because that'll tell the story of kind of how this class shapes out.
Yeah, I agree. And just, as a not even as a realistic college football fan approach, just a biased FSU fan who wants them to compete. When I look at it, this is a big class, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's my faith in Mike Norvell to be a coach, but just the ability to compete with the top tier programs. Because while there are outliers like Michigan and, Washington making the championship, generally speaking, you do have to be able to recruit at a pretty high level. Norvell's class has improved every year. I would like to see a top 10 class this year. If you have to do it by recruiting 34 stars, so be it. But I would like to get a top 10 class, by maybe adding multiple 5-stars. I want to show that we're a program that can not only retain their 5-stars, but land multiple, because not a lot of teams can do that. But when the team in Gainesville is doing it, then you got to match that too. So that's just me personally speaking. I just want to see them be able to recruit big name talent like the rest of the schools that are competing for national titles and land multiple 5-stars. But you're right, it looks promising so far. But that is kind of all I have for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Maybe plug your socials before we kind of wrap it up here.
Yeah, you can follow me at Z Blostein 247 on Twitter. I work for Knowles247.com. So if you're an FSU fan, definitely get on there. I write, daily about FSU and FSU recruiting. We have a good group of guys that cover the program 365, 24/7. It's a fun time over there. So definitely get over there if you're a big Florida State fan. But yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. This is awesome.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for coming on again. I really appreciate you taking your time to be here. And of course, we're entering spring with recruiting, like you said, and the spring practices and all that, spring games. So I hope to talk to you soon after the spring games. Thank you for coming on. And guys, remember, like the video, subscribe, comment down below what you want to see more of. And until next time.